Awesome. Okay, so again, aloha everybody, mahalo for being here. Welcome to the Mālama Pūpūkea-Waimea Marine Science Talk Story session. We are excited this month to start with Jason Mellinger. Jason is not only a great friend and an all-around wonderful guy, but Jason is also the outreach, education and outreach specialist with the Division of Aquatic Resources. And so we will just get started and go right into it. Go ahead, Jason.
All right, thanks for the awesome introduction. It's really great to be here. Thank you everybody for attending. It's always a great opportunity when I get to share some of the work we're doing and also some of the messages we have about protecting our natural resources here in Hawaii. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started with my presentation. Without further ado, here we go. Let's see if I can do this. All right, can I get a thumbs up if you can see it? Jenny? All right, perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks, Uncle Bob. All right, so I just wanted to introduce everybody to the Department of Land and Natural Resources, which is the department of the state that I work for. And then specifically, I work for the Division of Aquatic Resources, which is one of the 12 divisions under the DLNR, which is part of the Hawaii state government. So let me get my clicker going. There we go. This is the logo for the DLNR. We hear a lot about the DLNR in the news, but specifically the Division of Aquatic Resources, we focus on aquatic resources. And I really like to use the word aquatic as a key word here, just to remind everybody, it's not just the ocean here in Hawaii that has our aquatic resources, but all of our aquatic ecosystems. So actually, I'll stick on this slide. So when we think about our aquatic ecosystems, we can think of our freshwater streams that run down into our nearshore estuaries, the brackish water environments, the mulivai, and then also out into the ocean. So all these environments combined to kind of make up what the Aquatic Resource Division is responsible for. Today, we're going to talk about coral reef restoration and the importance of nearshore environments in Hawaii. I feel like whenever I have a title slide like this, it deserves like a movie theater entrance, like coral reef restoration and the importance of nearshore environments in Hawaii. Extra exciting, right? So what I wanted to put this title in here for was just to remind myself to tell you guys, we're going to talk about how the state restores coral reefs and our coral reef restoration nursery, but we're also going to talk about our nearshore environments, the importance of those, and kind of use corals as a species to guide us through how these nearshore environments are so critical to not only our lives here in Hawaii, but the aquatic livelihood in Hawaii as well. So our division, big mission here, the big keywords are manage, conserve, and restore those aquatic resources from all those various environments I mentioned before, our oceans, our saltwater environments, our freshwater environments. We have very unique streams as well as very unique native stream organisms. Of course, our estuaries, our nearshore environments, these are one of the most important environments here in Hawaii. These are our nurseries. This is where a large number of both our freshwater and saltwater species grow up, get lots of resources, get big, and then we see them out in the open oceans or we see them up high in our waterfalls and our streams. And then, of course, we also manage public fishing areas. We are the fisheries management agency for the state. So we make all the rules and regulations for fishing, and we make sure that our resources are managed in a way that we can see them for a long time, continuously from here on out. So without further ado, coral. And I always like to think of this slide as we're diving underwater, we're starting to look into coral, and we're going to start off with just a really simple introduction to coral. Some of you may already know this, but I always think it's a great way to start just to get our feet wet with some of the basics. So when we think about a coral itself is actually only one polyp as it starts out. So one of these mouths over here, and these are actually hundreds of mouths on this large coral we're looking at. Let me see if I can get my pointer out here. There we go. So we can see our polyps over here and then our coral body over here. So a lot of corals are made up of a number of these polyps, these mouths. And the mouths, if you look at it, it looks like an upside down jellyfish. And I always like to say that because it's a good reminder that corals are related to jellyfish. They're a soft bodied invertebrate that grows a hard skeleton kind of around that soft body. So they have tentacles that they can grab food with. Some corals can even sting with those tentacles. They have a mouth and a stomach. Pretty simple organism. Pretty much they focus on eating and then growing bigger, and they actually kind of clone themselves. And you see that a lot of corals, once again, will have a number of these polyps all over their bodies. And then I skipped on our diagram here, zooxanthellae. I'll come back to those in just a second, but these are a critical other organism that lives inside of the tissue of the coral, a symbiotic organism. So when we look at a coral polyp, not all corals have tons and tons of mouths. This is actually a mushroom coral, aka fungia is the family name for this type of coral, kind of like fungus. I always think that's an easy one to remember. And we see here, there's just one big mouth, one large polyp in the center. And so this coral actually pulls food through these crevices down into its mouth. Pretty cool. So when we think about coral polyps, how do they work into a coral reef? Well, coral polyps, as they eat and grow, they turn into coral colonies. So we look at this reef down here, we've got a colony here, we've got a colony here. We can distinguish them by their shapes and colors. Oh, and then of course, all of these colonies together create a coral reef. So that's how we get coral reefs from coral polyps. So I want to quiz you guys to see if anybody can, just without much information, answer this question. Which one of these pictures has a healthy reef? The picture on the left or the picture on the right? Go ahead and type it into the chat, and I'll count down from about 5 just to see what people say. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so the healthy reef is on the right. You guys got it right. So we know just from looking at coral that healthy reefs, they have a little more color to them. Maybe we notice that this white bleaching color here is pretty bad. So that's good. We've got some good familiarity with what healthy and unhealthy corals look like. So let's continue on. All right, we've got another picture. So which picture has the healthy corals in it? The one on the left or the right? So healthy corals, left side or right side? And I'll count down from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, I'm seeing some things pop up. All right, left side. So perfect. We're using our just basic visual skills to identify these healthy and unhealthy corals. So let's see what we actually just did there. Zooxanthellae. I mentioned them earlier. Well, we were actually identifying the presence and absence of zooxanthellae in those coral. So when we look at a coral polyp, remember the mouths, here's a couple down here, inside the tissue is that symbiotic organism, zooxanthellae, or zoques for short. So these algae, they actually photosynthesize and share that food with the coral. So they can make 75 to 90% of the coral's food. That's a whole lot. So the reason why we don't see the mouths very often when we look at coral, we think of them as just maybe hard surfaces, is the mouths typically only come out to feed at night because they're getting tons and tons of food from these zooxanthellae during the day. Now, the other really important thing is that zooxanthellae give coral their color. So this coral, if we zoomed out a little bit, it'd probably be brown to our naked eye. So when we look at corals, the color that they are is actually the presence of zooxanthellae inside the tissue. So we can see in this little diagram, thanks to Noah for this great infographic, a healthy coral is nice and colorful, filled with zooxanthellae. And then as that coral gets stressed, as it gets sick, as something goes wrong, even just let's say a low tide and it's exposed to a lot of sunlight and air, those zooxanthellae will say, hey, it's not so comfortable in here. We're getting out of here. Or the coral will actually kind of get sick enough to throw up all these zooxanthellae into the ocean. So now with the zooxanthellae free floating in the water, the coral looks a lot less bright, a lot less colorful, and it'll turn white. So that's what coral bleaching is. Just like that, in 15 minutes, we know coral bleaching. I think that was like 2 weeks in college. I had to wait to learn that. So hopefully that's a nice shortcut for you guys. So when we think of things that harm coral, what are they actually doing to the coral where they're stressing them out, they're causing them to bleach? And this is actually a point of starvation. If those zooxanthellae were making so much food, where's that food going to come from now? So these corals that are bleached, they're not dead yet. That's important to remember. But if nothing happens to kind of help them out or the conditions don't return to normal, these guys might actually go the wrong way and senesce. So when we think about a healthy coral reef, how do we keep them from bleaching? How do we keep them from getting sick and dying like that? Well, we need clean and clear water. And here's a hint. All that sunlight we mentioned earlier feeding those corals, easy way to remember why we need clean and clear water. Corals love that shallow water, clear water environment. We of course have deep water corals, but the majority of our nearshore reefs are in shallow water because they love that penetrating sunlight. Also need lots of grazing by fish and invertebrates. And here's a really cool fact to take home with you. Here in Hawaii, we have some of the slowest growing corals in the entire world. Our average rate of growth for our reef building corals is about 2 centimeters per year. 2 centimeters. So if you put a fist up to your eyeball, nice, tight and closed, slowly open it up. As soon as you see light, stop. That little bit you opened up your fist is how much a coral the size of your fist would grow in a year. So in 1 year, it goes from this to just like that. So if corals are growing that slow, guess how fast the algae in the ocean is growing? Well, it actually doubles its size within a week in the right conditions. So that means it's a great food source for the majority of organisms in the ocean. But if they're not there to eat it, it's going to grow over top and outcompete the coral pretty quickly. So now we're getting a little bit of a better picture of a coral reef and sort of what it takes to be healthy. We need clean and clear water. We need lots of fish to make sure that it's keeping the algae down. We want to avoid bleaching, and we want to make sure that those polyps are able to get lots of food. All right, so now that we know about coral, let's keep it easy. Let's keep it simple. Let's think about why corals are important. Like I said, we're talking about corals just to kind of think about what's a species that we can all know and relate to that's near shore that really is critical to our environment. So when we think of corals and fish, we know that they offer protection. I like to think this picture in the bottom left is a shark swimming around and these fish are hiding inside the coral. They also offer homes. So this is a habitat. It's not just a living organism. So think of the trees in the forest. They're a living organism. The coral in the ocean, same thing. And then of course, corals are a great food source for different organisms. We have herbivores that are eating algae and plant material in the ocean. We have omnivores that are eating fish and plant material. And then of course we have corallivores. Guess what they eat? You guessed it, coral. So corals are a really important resource for a number of different reasons to the fish. And then of course to us, we have a number of reasons to appreciate them as well. Those fish that we love to see around the corals, they're not only a food source for us, they also offer recreation, an opportunity to go in the water and swim around our beautiful oceans. Think about all the tourists that come here every single year. Would they come here if our oceans weren't as nice as they are or kept as clean and healthy as we can? So that's one big industry that's kept healthy. But let's think about our communities locally. Does a healthy reef provide more and better food for our communities? Absolutely. So that's one of our really important resources. And then this picture in the bottom right, we see a wave going over a coral reef. Well, if you're a surfer, you have corals to thank for creating all that structure that these waves break over top of. And also, and this is pretty relevant due to the recent tsunami warning and the volcano that erupted in Tonga, when waves in the ocean, especially activity like that caused by earthquakes and volcanoes, when those waves come over to our shores, the coral is actually what causes that energy to break up and not rush right on shore. So if we didn't have our corals, we'd see a lot more erosion around our islands. We wouldn't be able to build on the beaches. We'd actually probably all be living towards the center of the island just to stay safe. So we have corals to thank for where we live and all the great things we have around our nearshore environment. So now let's talk about some of the things that harm our corals. And let's start with our man-made, situation. So corals, we've recognized their importance. We know a lot about them. We know why, what it takes to keep them healthy. But let's look at, our impact on corals over time. Well, in the early 1900s, I made this diagram in, as you can see, 2016. You can see the comparison of population of people in Hawaii to what we see now. And there's obviously going to be a lot more people in 2022 than there were in 2016. So we can add a few extra bodies to the bottom of that chart. So let's compare the lifestyles as well. Early on in Hawaii, we have an environment that's not really altered too much by human impacts. A lot of what we do on the land is symbiotic, working well with the environment. So we see a naturally flowing stream. And remember, streams never flow straight. They always curve and meander down pathways. So we have our stream flowing down into the Lo'i and then breaking back into the stream again, into the ocean. So this system's allowing that natural water flow that I mentioned is so important earlier to occur, and the community is living alongside of it. You can tell that they didn't do too much to change that. Well, let's look at our modern day communities. Let's fast forward to 2016, even to 2022, because I think these are pretty current satellite images. So if you're from South Shore, we can see all of these blue lines are streams that are coming down from the mountains into the ocean. And remember, there's an estuary at the entrance of every single one of these streams, and that's that nursery where all of our baby fish live. Well, you can see we have a number of very straight sections of stream where obviously we've had alterations. So those might be concrete streams where we have the excess water in our neighborhoods flow through. And then we can also see, look at the population and the number of buildings and places and houses and roads that these streams are now traveling through. So what are they picking up on their way to the ocean? Because remember, Hawaii, all of our islands have large mountains in the center. So no matter what, everything that's happening is going to end up along our shoreline. So we can move over towards the center of the island. Look at the number of streams running into Pearl Harbor. You can think about all of the different cities and towns and communities and even farmland as we get over to the west side that these streams are flowing through. And all of that water is not only going into Pearl Harbor, but out into Eva Beach. So we can see what is our impact now as a big population on not just our streams, now our corals that are right here along shore. And because we're talking with Pūpūkea today, we're going to have a North Shore image as well. So we can see the streams that flow into our MLCD. And so once again, we have a lot less impact here on the North Shore, which is a great thing. So hopefully we see some better, healthier reefs due to that less altered stream flow. So we know what humans can do as we grow in population, but also corals can just get sick. So we're just going to talk about a few things that happen to corals. Well, corals, of course, have those corallivores I mentioned that love to eat corals. So these snails here, propellid snails particularly, they always have little bumps on them. They like to eat corals, as well as everybody's favorite corallivore, a parrotfish. But corals also can have tissue loss, which is a disease potentially. You can get tumors, so growth anomalies. And then this discoloration, this is actually a parasite that's burrowed into the coral and made a home. And we call these coral zits because they kind of look like little zits on the coral. But this can spread throughout a reef. And you know what? That's natural. Everything in the ocean's got to survive. And even those parasites need to find a home. Another thing in Hawaii that's natural, if you can tell from this picture, we have a lot of brown water out here. Remember, our streams in Hawaii are all coming from the mountains, and they're always going to dry up during the dry season and then flush out as soon as we get our first rain of the wet season. So even before there were people here, our corals, they were used to getting some dirt on them, getting some sedimentation, but we've obviously added a lot more to that dirt. It's not just sticks and bugs anymore. And now there's a lot of plastics, there's oils, there's different pollutants, fertilizers, even medicines and things like that. So back to man-made problems, because we just talked about how that natural stream flow can be altered by us. We can also damage the reef by not taking care of it, simply by not picking up our trash. We know those little mouths, they've got to grab food. What if there's a plastic bag over them? We drop our anchors to make sure we stay safe in our boats in a single spot. These corals, if they're growing 2 centimeters a year, what happens when a coral gets busted in half? How long is it going to take to grow back, especially here in Hawaii? Not to mention, every single spot that it broke is like an open wound that can be that can lead to infections or anything like that. So we can see all these different pollutant impacts, but also even standing on corals. Remember, they're related to jellyfish. It's a soft-bodied animal in a hard skeleton. So standing on them, you're definitely causing some damage. So you can see this old coral, which must be very old based on the size of it, is pretty much dead at the top because of so many people probably standing on it over the years. One of our other problems that's been introduced by people are invasive species. As we mentioned, algae can grow super fast. So what happens if we get a lemur or an algae that isn't native, that doesn't have any natural predators? It's going to grow out of control. So you can see in this bottom right-hand picture, this is our smothering seaweed in Kaneohe Bay, which luckily is under control. It used to be out of control and filling up all of those homes for fish, all those safe places to hide. So we saw a massive degradation of our reefs due to this. Then this picture, this might be one of the most important slides you guys see all day. I like to use this example to show everyone that when we're talking about coral health, and we just went over all these impacts, what happens when those corals start to die? Whether it's bleaching, whether it's pollution, whether it's people standing on them or anchors falling down. Well, no matter where you are in the world, when a coral reef starts to die, unfortunately, a phase shift happens. So that means it's no longer going to be a coral reef. So what comes next? Well, I'll show you guys. This picture was taken in the same location. So we have a healthy reef here. It's a little deep, so it looks a little bright. But these are all healthy corals. And we see, look at all the herbivores swimming around. So we can get some evidence. All right, this is a pretty comfortable environment. Here's the same reef after it's had a phase shift. So our phase shift shows us that we had a transition from coral reefs to an algae-dominated reef. And an algae-dominated reef is hospitable for things like sea urchins and other invertebrates. No longer do we have that environment for that diverse, healthy coral reef. So let's think about all those benefits of corals. We have not just for the fish, the homes and the safety, but for us, the food, the recreation, the protection for our shorelines. All of that is lost when we have a phase shift. So that's where we come in with the Hawaii State Coral Restoration Nursery. So we of course just saw a picture of what the worst case scenario is with the reef when it starts to die. But you know what? Luckily for us here in Hawaii, we haven't had massive die-offs of our coral reefs. Places like Florida have really suffered over the last few years, and we're trying to avoid that. So by getting ahead of the game, one of the things we've done at the state is start our restoration nursery to help start getting more corals out into the ocean. So one of the things I highlighted in this slide is we are mitigating with this program planned and unplanned impacts. So we talked about all the unplanned impacts before, all of the things like standing on coral or something dropping into the ocean and destroying coral. But what about when we are building on the shoreline, or the military needs to do construction and it causes an area of reef to be disturbed? Well, our nursery can actually come in and collect those corals, bring them into our lab, and go through a process to get them back out into the ocean. So that's one of the many ways that we're able to restore these coral reefs with our programs. But I'll go into some of the science that we use and how the Coral Restoration Nursery is really advanced in getting these corals as fast as they can out into the ocean. So just to start us off, we got to go over one more, let's say level 2 coral coral detail, which is how do corals reproduce and grow? Well, remember, a coral, all it takes to be a coral is one polyp. And so that polyp, if we look over here in our right-hand picture, we see asexual reproduction. It will actually, as it grows, clone itself over and over again and create that colony that we saw before. However, corals also sexually reproduce. So a lot of us have heard of full moon coral spawns. Well, sure enough, they're influenced by the time of year and moon phases, and they spawn by broadcasting all of their eggs and gametes and reproductive material into the ocean. The ocean mixes it all up, and then all the little polyps that are formed eventually find a home. So right there, we just went from all of these eggs in the ocean down on the bottom here to our little larvae that's going to eventually settle into that single polyp. And then remember, asexual reproduction, now we've got our coral colony. So that's how corals grow. Pretty simple, right? Nothing too complicated. And there's our little reminder of 2 centimeters a year growth, which is really extreme. extremely slow. So our program makes use of non-coral reef source materials. So how do you start to help the ocean? Well, first things first, we don't want to remove any natural material or corals from the ocean if we don't have to. So let's find a reef-safe material that maybe we can attach these corals to. So what you guys see here is we actually have created a few different designs and different shapes to maximize space, to maybe maximize growth. And this is actually a reef-safe concrete that we've made. So now we can attach these corals to the concrete, and we'll actually fragment the corals when we do that. And I'll show you guys why. So when we get a coral, let's say there's a construction project, the military is building a new marina, and we need to go in and save some corals before they're damaged by the construction. We'll actually take those corals to our lab, quarantine them, make sure there's no diseases or bacteria or other organisms on them. And then we can actually fragment those corals into small pieces. And those small pieces allow these corals to grow pretty rapidly as little individual colonies. Because remember, each little one of these now is a colony, but they originally started as the same little coral colony together. So all of these little plugs that we made, all of these little pieces of coral will get glued to the sides of these modules. And the modules in here are shaped like pyramids. Some are shaped like jacks, like we saw. Some are even shaped like, looks like futuristic skyscrapers. So all of these different designs are where our plugs are glued to. And then here's the really, really cool part. Remember how I mentioned corals only grow 2 centimeters per year? Well, if we cover that hard structure with our little plugs of coral, and each one of those coral plugs grows 2 centimeters that year, when they grow and they actually touch each other, they'll say, hey, we actually came from the same original coral, and they'll merge together. So what we see is a little plug here slowly growing out that 2 centimeters over a year. If they're put together, they can connect and create one large coral, which is pretty awesome. So now we're getting to a point that we're covering a surface with live coral. So what we look at here in this picture, and we've seen this a couple times now, are these pyramids are slowly going to be covered with coral and essentially become a live coral of that size. Because remember, corals are just that polyp and skeleton right on the surface. Only the first few millimeters are the living coral. The rest of it is all the old coral structure, the old skeleton that it's slowly building on year after year. We're skipping that process. We're letting the coral cover these new modules. And then we've got to make sure that they're ready to go out into the ocean. So one of our favorite parts of the process is getting these corals adapted to natural seawater, all the bacteria and germs that you find in the ocean. And then one of my favorite parts of that is they also have to get strong to be able to withstand all the ocean currents and the waves. Remember, those corals are helping to protect our shoreline. So if we put all these big modules out there and they just break in the next storm, that's a big waste of time. So what we have here in the back, you can see this is actually one of our devices that puts a strong current every once in a while through this large tub that's outdoors. And sure enough, that helps to start these corals to, or excuse me, this helps these corals start to grow a much stronger skeleton and be much more resilient. So once they're through that process, they've gotten acclimated to natural seawater, they're strong and ready for the test run in the ocean. We actually will bring them out and glue them down to places that we've identified as a healthy spot for a reef. So a lot of people say, hey, well, I don't see any coral here. Why don't you put it right here in my backyard? Well, what if that backyard's right next to a freshwater stream? Is that a good place for a coral? Or what if that place gets really, really low tides and the reef is exposed all the time to the sun, different points of the year? Those aren't the best places for us to start putting these modules. So we find the best environments we can, we glue these modules, and then what you can see is over time, the modules will start to look a little more natural, then grow onto the reef. So just like that, we've been able to create a new coral and start to grow a new coral reef. And guess what? This whole process to get this coral out into the ocean at this point only takes about a year. So we've been able to create a coral, and some of these modules are now 3 feet by 3 feet or even larger, we're getting corals that large to be ready to go into the ocean to start restoration work within 1 year. So we can compare that to other solutions around the world because there's lots of other ways to grow coral. And here in Hawaii, we actually have a number of different researchers trying all sorts of different things. So a lot of people are familiar with these trees, which we see in the Caribbean. Why don't we have them in Hawaii? Well, what happens when a big swell comes, whether it's South Shore season or North Shore season? These are going to get banged around. So not necessarily the best for our environment here. You can see a little rudimentary, also my very pixelated picture here. That's how rudimentary it is. These are just concrete blocks with little corals glued onto concrete blocks stuck in there. So they're creating a reef with what they have. Corals can attach to almost any hard substrate. We have coral gardens, and this is what a lot of researchers do when they can create different trials for different experiments. So what we see here are a number of different plugs that will probably eventually make it out to the open ocean on a reef. Some people have even used rebar. Corals will grow in certain areas on that. PVC, we've got a large clay structure. Tires are even used because remember, fish habitat is important. I don't think I see any corals on here. Remember, when it comes to restoration, it depends on what you're restoring. Maybe this environment doesn't naturally have coral. It did naturally have some features that let fish or other organisms live there that support that community. All right, we've got coral gardens, of course, and then this is one of my favorite futuristic coral structures here. They can actually plug corals into this awesome looking coral skeleton structure. And I'll just pop through these ones. All right, and then of course, even concrete, and that's one of the ones we use here in Hawaii. So this is one of our artificial reef materials. Ours don't look like squares, we call them Z blocks. We do have a few artificial reefs here around the state of Hawaii. And yeah, that's pretty much it for our restoration method and how we kind of go about putting corals back into the ocean, as well as saving corals that are in danger, whether it be planned or unplanned damage. Then one of the things I always like to include is just a reminder of here's a way you can protect coral. You know, I always like to say choose one thing off of this list. I personally like educate up here in the top right-hand corner. Because I think a lot of people, once they learn about what a coral is, what it takes for them to survive, and how important they are to not only us, but also all the different organisms in the ocean, they've got a reason to maybe step a little more carefully when they go in the ocean, or a reason to maybe make sure they don't bump into that coral and break off a piece when they're snorkeling. So that's one way, but you guys can choose one as well. And then also, I want to share a few other resources. Eyes of the Reef. This is a great program that was started years ago by the University of Hawaii. And it's a great way to learn more about how to identify what does a healthy reef look like? What does a coral disease look like? How can I tell if my place, the place that I go swimming, the place that I go fishing, how can I tell if that reef is healthy or not? Eyes of the Reef is where you can learn all of that. There's online modules now, so you can just go online, click through the classes, and you can learn a whole lot about how to identify all these different threats to coral, even the invasive species. And the best part of this is the Eyes of the Reef program directly reports to us. So we'll hear about any reports of invasive species or threats to your area. And here's my last plug for Eyes of the Reef. Think about going to the beach. And if you guys go to the beach, let's say twice in 2 or 3 months, chances are you've been there more frequently than some of our scientists have, because we've got to go around the entire island the entire year to do surveys, to check on these reefs, to check on these locations. So if you happen to be there more frequently and you notice a change, you can let us know right away. Because what if it's an invasive species and we get there 6 months later? It's had a long time to spread. So please use Eyes of the Reef as a great resource to train yourself. Then, of course, iNaturalist as a great resource to help you identify different species. This is a public sourced identification app. And then I have, of course, a plug for boating. If you are a boater out there, get your free Hawaii boating license at Boat US. Then one of my favorite websites, one of the favorite resources for every scientist here in Hawaii, marinelifephotography.com. These are where we get the best photos as well as some of the best information about literally every single species in Hawaii. So if you see something that you haven't seen before, go ahead and check out this website. Guarantee you can find it on there. That's it. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for showing up today for this lunch presentation. And hopefully you all got to learn something new. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason. I swear, I always learn so much from you every single time. So good. There are a couple of questions in the chat. And so the first question is, what is the life expectancy of a healthy coral reef?
All right, that's a really awesome question. You know, I don't know. I'll say this, I don't know the answer to that, but coral reefs in theory, based on the way that corals grow, can kind of grow infinitely. That single polyp slowly replicates itself and then grows and grows and grows. So if we've come across corals, let's just say myself diving in Kaneohe Bay, that are the size of the room that I'm in right now, maybe 30 feet by 30 feet. So that coral's obviously hundreds of years old. So when you swim by large structures underwater, especially in Hawaii, you can kind of get a gauge, all right, this guy's either, or this girl's really old, or maybe, you know, if it's a small coral, it just got going.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I read somewhere that, you know, reefs are thousands and thousands of years old, and typically individual coral polyps can be around 100 years old, like just
Wow.
like life forms, right? They die, but corals keep growing on top of each other. So like you said, infinitely and then individually probably.
Yeah. And one other thing I'll add is keep an eye out if you're a swimmer, diver, kayaker, and you go by our offshore islands. A number of our offshore islands, think of Flat Island in Kailua, is actually an old coral reef. You can see the old shells in the rock. You can see the old imprints of coral in there. So that's just a reef that slowly, as Hawaii has, you know, grown and changed, has come up out of the water. And now we walk on it, and it's a great seabird habitat.
Yeah, awesome. So there's another good question here. Uncle Bob put this one in the chat. Coral genetics is part of the story. What about the zooxanthellae genetics and its variabilities? Who or what specific stressors triggers the zooxanthellae to exit in response to those stressors? He sees unhealthy coral right next to healthy corals. So what is the triggers there? What's causing that, I think, is the question.
Yeah, I'd say generally speaking, because that question has some details that I can't speak on with a lot of excess knowledge, but I'd say generally speaking, the coral's loss of zooxanthellae is a response to some sort of stressor. And, you know, that could even be just, and this is interesting, even just algae in or limu in a current rubbing up against it constantly. And that can cause irritation, which will look bright pink, and it could even cause damage to the polyps, which would eventually start to cause them to get stressed and look more bleached or darker. Or whiter. And then each coral is genetically different from another. So, you know, some are more susceptible, some are less susceptible. And that's where we get into some of the research being done by the University of Hawaii and their work to find the corals that are best suited for, you know, reproducing or putting out in the ocean because of their ability to tolerate these changing conditions. And it's a great reminder that the way the state works is, you know, we really rely on that next generation research from the universities to influence how we go about, you know, making these management decisions. So if they find out something new, you better believe we're going to try and adopt it and implement it in the best way we can.
Awesome, thank you. So before we move on, does anyone have any other questions? Oh, I do see another question. Are there species of coral that are more resilient to climate change than others? If so, is DAR prioritizing their reintroduction into the wild to improve survivability?
So yeah, you know, our big goal for our coral nursery, I really like to think of it as almost a production facility. They want to get as many corals and as big of corals as they can out into the ocean. And so initially, just the corals that were able to grow best really were some of the ones that were getting chosen. However, the coral nursery also made a mission out of getting a collection of every single species of coral they could in Hawaii. So they actually have a coral arc project. So let's say a disease comes and hits a coral reef and hits one species in particular, they'll have it in their closed system at the nursery and be able to start working on getting more of it out and getting it replicated. So some corals grow faster than others, some grow slower. When it comes to these modules, they're working with a lot of our reef building corals, the ones that put down a really strong skeleton, because those are the ones that are going to create the most habitat. All of our smaller finger corals are great, but since they are a little more, they won't grow as big, essentially, and a lot of them grow vertically. Those ones are the ones that we probably have less of when it comes to our restoration work. So yeah, that's kind of where we choose, which corals, and it brings up something that I want to share as just a experience I had. In around 2015, we had a massive bleaching event here in Hawaii, and corals all around the island of Oahu were bleaching, and we were doing a massive survey, all hands on deck, the state, the university, the federal government. And after this bleaching event happened, unfortunately, during a survey in Kaneohe Bay, we came across a reef where all of one species of coral, mostly the Montipora rice coral, were pretty much on their way out, completely bleached and dead or almost dead. And so we went ahead, I actually got out of the boat and put an Eyes of the Reef report in. And sure enough, we had all hands on deck again a couple months later after this bleaching event to investigate what was going on. And these Montipora from that reef and around it were almost 80 to 90% dead on every single one of these reefs. So it shows, within 4 or 5 days, we went from seeing bleached corals that were looking pretty bad to corals that had completely died. And so that really showed all of the scientists in Hawaii that, bleaching causes a lot of stress to these corals and they can recover. But can they recover a second time in 2 or 3 months? Have they had enough time to build back their energy supplies to be resilient again? And what we saw here is those Montipora were particularly susceptible. So that's where it really comes into, some of our corals will not be the best, in certain situations, but we also need to make sure we have those in case something like that, massive die-off does happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. And that actually made me think, out here at Pūpūkea, the Kapo'o tide pools you're familiar with has been, an area of such high human use. And so when we think of impacts and threats to coral, one of the big things out here, in addition to all the regular stuff, is, feet. That image that you showed us is so powerful of how much damage can happen by just feet. And especially out here where there's so many visitors who aren't necessarily educated on corals and their impacts. It makes me wonder if the tide pools would be a great spot to do some restoration and maybe test out the resiliency of some of those wonderful corals you guys are growing out there. It might be a cool test spot, right? To test those areas over there. Which brings us to a really good question that Denise has. How robust is the funding long-term for DAR's coral program, and has the legislature been supportive?
Yeah, I'll say this, is that the coral nursery is well funded because they're one of the only ways that damage to coral reefs can be mitigated within the state. So let's say, we have a Matson container ship that happens to run aground on a reef outside of Honolulu Harbor. Well, they are responsible for that damage and the value of that damage. So it's our job to figure out the value of the reef or the resources that were there. And then just like, if they were responsible for a fire that burnt something down, that was another person's property, they have to pay a fee or a fine, and same with the state. So if that damage happens, we're able to collect money that's used specifically for restoration to replace those corals. Also, there's a program to, let's say, like I said, the military is going to build a new marina. well, they're going to work with us to hopefully mitigate that damage by letting us collect or move as much coral as we can before that happens. So the program ends up being funded through those different partnerships and kind of necessity for coral to be looked at in all of these different either construction projects, shoreline work, damage done by different industries. So yeah, you know, the nursery has been growing and growing and growing over the last few years. And at this point, it does very much stand out worldwide as a, you know, very productive, very, you know, highly reputable place because, like I said, we really focus on getting corals out in the ocean. So pretty cool. Oh, Jenny, you're muted.
Sorry. Gosh, you know, I usually pride myself in never doing that. Oh my gosh, I just saw Uncle Bob going like this. Uncle Bob put in the chat that there's a nonprofit group in Tahiti that gets tourists to help grow coral and makes a lot of money doing it. Yes, so that organization is called Coral Gardeners, and they are in Moorea, and they've actually come here and visited us and hung out with us here at Kapo'o. They're super cool brothers over there and titas in Tahiti doing similar work. And there is an organization in Hawaii doing similar work, and they are called Kuleana Coral. Yes. And so I know that they're partnered with you folks on in some ways, and they're doing some restoration out in the Ko'olina side of the island.
Yeah. I'll say something really quick about that, which is one of the things that I think it's really important to acknowledge is when it comes to coral restoration and everything I explained before, you know, even if we are producing 3 or 6 foot modules that are going out in the ocean, you know, by the 50 to 100 a year, you know, those modules lined up next to each other aren't really that large of a reef. So it really does take all of these different efforts and different methods to create, you know, different reefs and different restoration, positive restoration here in Hawaii. Just like a coral reef isn't made up of one coral that's grown forever. It's a multiple of colonies or group of colonies that make that reef. Same thing, all of these different groups putting their work together are going to create these different, you know, reef structures that are all important in their own way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Jason. I'm just going to check and see if there's any more questions for Jason. And then I'll give you a second to think about that. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to talk specifically about the rules and regulations pertaining to the Pūpūkea Marine Life Conservation District. A lot of folks have been asking for a refresher, and there have been a recent change in the rules, and Jason helped with that and with some of the education surrounding those rules and regulations. So we're going to move into that. But any more questions for Jason specifically before we move on?
Yeah, I have one more. We're working on the management plan, and I know everybody has an opportunity for input. But if you could make some rules for the Pūpūkea Marine Life Conservation District, that could be included in a management plan that might have applicability to all of the conservation areas. What would
Absolutely
be, your top 10 suggestions?
Yeah. Well, you know, you guys at Pūpūkea are one of the MLCDs, and the earlier MLCDs and the processes you guys are all going through are paving the way for all the protected areas to follow. So I'm sure we can come up with at least a list of 10.
Awesome. Okay. Oh, one more question.
Of course.
This is a good one. Thank you for all of your questions, Joseph. Let's see. In some cultures, coral jewelry and items are highly valued. Is that a source of concern here in Hawaii? Is that a potential avenue to raise funds?
Great question. So, you know, here in Hawaii, historically, there's been a lot of collection from the ocean for gifts and, you know, crafts and things like that. But slowly it's become less and less let's say, favorable based on just the state of our resources. So good thing you brought that up. Tonight, we actually have a meeting about our legislative process and some of the bills. But this year, 2022, one of the bills that's been introduced is exactly that, to check out the jewelry industry and actually ban the import and export of coral here in Hawaii. So right now it's illegal to take coral from the beach, to even pick up an old piece you found and take it home. That coral, as we just learned, you throw it back in the ocean, it can be the home for a brand new coral to start growing. So that's the state of things here. So we don't see a lot of our own corals collected. But we do have a lot of corals shipped to us from other places, which means Hawaii is part of that industry that is somewhere, taking away corals from the natural environment. So yeah, follow that bill this year. It obviously was important enough to get brought up, and hopefully we'll see some progress.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. Okay. It has been an absolute pleasure having you educate all of us here today. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you guys. I'm happy you guys all just wanted to listen to me talk about stuff I enjoy for an hour. So thank you guys.
Good. It's so important, education and outreach is such an important part of the work that so many of us here today do. I know we have, all of us understand the importance of education. So mahalo for the work that you do. And you're so good at it too. You're so fun to watch. So I've seen Jason do presentations for 5-year-olds all the way up to kupuna. So it's always just entertaining and informational. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Awesome. So what we're going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we're just going to shift right into some updates or just a refresher of the rules and regulations for the Pūpūkea Marine Life Conservation District. So let me just share my screen here and get to the beginning of my presentation. Okay, Jason, can I get a thumbs up if you can see that? Because I can see you. Great, thank you. Okay, and then again, same thing. If there's any questions, you guys can stick them in the chat. Okay, so Pūpūkea Marine Life Conservation District is nearly 40 years old now, and it is a place that is designated to provide fish and other aquatic species with a protected area in which to grow and reproduce. We started Mālama Pūpūkea-Waimea, our organization, started as a Makai Watch program here on the island of Oahu. We were the first and we're currently the only Makai Watch program on Oahu. And so Makai Watch, for those of you who aren't familiar with the program, in a nutshell, is sort of like a neighborhood watch, but for the ocean. And so what we do is we train volunteers to be able to recognize and report any violations to the existing rules and regulations. And so we're reporting that to the folks who enforce the rules and regulations, which is the Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Conservation and Resources Enforcement, or DOCARE. And so DAR, who you've just sort of been introduced to through Jason, Division of Aquatic Resources, makes the rules, and then enforcement, the DOCARE guys enforce the rules, and then community groups like us with Makai Watch help educate about and sort of spread information about those rules, and then report back to these guys anything that we see. So Makai Watch volunteers are not enforcement, however, they are sort of the front line for educational outreach opportunities. And so I just want to say one thing really quickly about Lawaiʻapono. When we talk about rules and regulations, it's important to mention Lawaiʻapono, which means ethical fishing, fishing based on things better than the rules and regulations. We have this saying that just cause can, no means should. So there are rules and regulations that do protect our resources, our nearshore resources, but from a more Hawaiian perspective, they go a little bit deeper. So there's a quote here from Uncle Mac Poi Poi, who is master Lawaiʻa on Molokai, and we asked him, Uncle Mac, what does Lawaiʻapono mean? And he said, Lawaiʻapono is knowing how something will be replaced before you take it. And so just want to let you guys know that that's something that we often think about. Okay. Oops, oh my gosh. Sorry guys, I hit the wrong button. Hang on 1 second. Okay. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Okay, back at it. So throughout our islands, we have lots of different protected areas. Some of those are FMAs or fishery management areas. Some of those, like us, are marine life conservation districts. On Oahu, for marine life conservation districts, you have Hanauma, and then you also have Waikiki, and then you have us. And so we are up here on the North Shore. And so this slide, I was just telling Jason when we started this morning, I have to update my slide, and I'll explain why in a second. But the Pūpūkea Marine Life Conservation District is this area that you see on the slide here. Everything inside this yellow line is protected. And so this is Waimea Bay, just to give you a reference of where we are. And these islets off of Waimea Bay are called the Mālama Pūpūkea-Waimea islets. And so the sanctuary includes those. And it goes out across here. This point over here on the north end of the sanctuary is called Kulalua Point. And so 100 yards out from Kulalua Point, all the way over to those Mālama Pūpūkea-Waimea islets and back in is the Pūpūkea Marine Life Conservation District. You'll notice this big yellow circle here surrounding this area that we know as the tide pools, the Kapo'o tide pools. And if you can see here, up until very recently, the Marine Life Conservation District did not actually include the Kapo'o tide pools, but just a few months ago that was changed, and now the boundaries of the Kapo'o tide pools are included into the Marine Life Conservation District. And so we'll go over what that looks like now. So this is the new map that has been put out by DAR. In fact, this is the map that is on the signs that are all around the sanctuary now. Those signs that surround the sanctuary, if you're in the area, it does include the phone number on the sign if you need to report a violation, just so you guys know. But we just took the map off of there so you could see it, that now the tide pools are indeed protected. So again, the Mālama Pūpūkea-Waimea islets over to Kulalua Point, and we'll go through the three areas inside of Waimea Bay: Kalua'amaua, also known as Three Tables, Kapo'o, and Pūpūkea, also known as Sharks Cove. Okay, so Kalamai, this is a little blurry, is the best picture I have right now of this angle of this area. But what we're looking at here on this bottom left part, this is Keiki Beach. Over here is the area we call Sharks Cove or Kapo'o. This is the tide pools. And so what we're looking at is out here. And this is going to be that Kulalua Point boundary of the Marine Life Conservation District. Now, a lot of folks are unclear where in this area exactly Kulalua Point is. And so what we want to do is we want to point it out here. And so as you can see with this yellow area, this is actually Kulalua Point here. And so what that essentially means is that everything on this side of the line, you cannot fish, and everything on this side of that line, you can fish. Unfortunately, a lot of folks think that that is Kulalua Point, and it's not. So we do a lot of outreach and education with Makai Watch in this area right here. I spend a lot of time out here educating folks about where the actual boundary is. So not here. And so if you're out there, this is sort of a live picture of what this looks like. This picture, if anybody is familiar with the area, was actually taken some years back when we had that really crazy sand event. So normally Kulalua Point, which is here, does not have all this sand. And in fact, the rocks are more way over here exposed. So this was an unusual sandy event that year. But having said that, this is Kulalua Point here. And so what that looks like is this. So if you're on the green area, you can fish. And if you're on the red area, you cannot fish. Now, there are no physical boundary markers out there. And that's something that we are trying to work on to determine, what can we put here that a fisher could see? What's a physical thing that could go here that could withstand 70-foot surf and also be visible? So if anybody has any great ideas, we are open to suggestions on how we can work with DAR to come up with something that can, again, withstand the giant surf that comes up to this wall here, and also be some sort of a physical marker. So just one last angle, if you're out there and you're on the reef flat in the summertime, this is what it looks like. It's this point out here. So no can fish off of right here. You have to go that way and then you can fish. Okay, and so this is just an aerial picture of the tide pools, the Kapo'o tide pools, which are now fully protected. So the line used to go like this, and then there was this gray area like, where is the line? Because really and truly the water is always open. The Kapo'o tide pools aren't actually by definition tide pools. They're a sort of a shallow water area, less tide pools than shallow water areas. So now we don't have to worry about it. The line goes like this. And so all of the rules and regulations protecting the rest of the Marine Life Conservation District apply inside the tide pools as well. In addition, we just wanted to add that when the tide pool package went through and that we were able to have DAR, well, we encouraged DAR to include the tide pools, and they did. Thank you, DAR. DAR put in another rule, which is really great. And so what that rule does is it bans the feeding of fish or introducing any food substance into the water to attract fish. And so that was actually a really huge problem that we were coming across within the cove area and the tide pool area, was people with just loaves of bread and bags of frozen peas and all of that non-natural stuff that fish don't need or want. Well, maybe they want it, but they don't need it. And it was leaving rubbish and plastic behind too. So just so everybody's aware, you can help spread the word. The tide pools are totally protected now. And for the entire Marine Life Conservation District, it is illegal to feed fish or introduce any food substance into the water. And so I'm watching the chat. I don't see any questions yet. If you do, feel free to unmute and just stop me or put a question in the chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going. So the rules for Waimea Bay are a little bit different. So like you saw in that first slide, it's all a no-take zone. And so a no-take means no take, don't take anything. So it's illegal to take, harvest, harass, anything like that, collect. But Waimea Bay does have some exceptions to the rules. And so here's what you can do at Waimea Bay. You can fish with fishing poles. You can have 2 poles per person with 2 hooks per pole for any fin fish from the shoreline for any legal fish, legal according to the current rules and regulations. That's a lot of information. And so here's what that looks like. And we're gonna point this out here. Okay. So from that point to that point, anything inside is considered shoreline. So if your feet are standing on the shoreline, you can cast your line into the bay. So you cannot stand on this point and cast over here towards Kalua of Mawa. It has to be inside the bay, okay? You cannot be on a boat or a kayak or a stand-up paddleboard or anything of that nature inside here and fish off of it. Your feet have to be on the shoreline. So for Makai Watch, a lot of times, we'll get volunteers that'll say, hey, there's a guy on a kayak, he's inside the bay and he's pole fishing, but is that legal? And so the answer is no. Your feet need to be on the shoreline and you can only use a pole to catch any fin fish. So in other words, why does it say fin fish? Well, you cannot use a pole to pull up, say, octopus. That is not a fin fish. And I mentioned that because it's happened before. Another Makai Watch question we get is, one day we got a call, and this is Jump Rock right here. And there is 2 men on top of Jump Rock pole fishing into the water below Jump Rock. And they called and they said, Jenny, there's guys standing on Jump Rock pole fishing. Is that legal? So I called DoCare and they determined that that would be considered shoreline. So again, just because can, no means should. Probably not safe or smart to do with so many people, but legally for Makai Watch purposes, for those of you out there who help us keep an eye on things, if you see someone standing on jump rock pole fishing, maybe give them stink eye, but you don't have to report them. Okay, the next question here, well, I'll just move to this. All other fishing methods are prohibited except for these, okay? So it is legal currently in the Marine Life Conservation District to take with legal nets, which is surround nets, opelu, which are schooling fish of mackerel scad during August and September, and also akule in November and December. Okay, so this is January. You shouldn't see any surround net happening in the Marine Life Conservation District's Waimea area at this time. But if you do in August and September or November and December, it's just for these two types of fish only. And so if you do have any questions, you can let us know, and I'll let you know how you can report things here in a second. But usually, just historically, you'll see that in this area of the bay here. Okay, so just so you guys know, usually we get a lot of calls like, oh my gosh, there's a guy surround netting in the bay, and we have to explain to folks that is legal if it's September and it's opelu. Okay, all right. The next question is the Wananapaoa islets itself. Sometimes you'll see people standing on the islets pole fishing off. That is never legal. So it is not okay to stand on the Wananapaoa islets and fish off of them into the bay. They are not considered shoreline. Okay, however, that line does go right behind this one. So if someone is inside the ocean, say spear fishing, and they're up against they're underwater, but they're on this side, that is okay. They are outside of the sanctuary there. Okay. All right, so where do we find these rules and regulations? It says any legal fish, according to the rules and regulations, you can catch any legal fish. So all the fish have rules and regulations. Well, the fish that are regulated have rules and regulations that determine the size that they need to be, how many you can have of those particular fish, and the season that they might have. And so all of that information can be found online by going to the dlnr.hawaii.gov's page, and you can find that under the fishing regulations portion. Also, there are resources out there, and Jason is the person who does this education and outreach across our islands. In fact, he was just out here the other day delivering new regulation books with our new Pūpūkea rules in them. Thank you, Jason, for that. And then also, if you go to certain places, you can come across this super cool ruler. They're kind of gold, like gold now, but they look like this, and they're really, oh, my camera is not catching it. But just so you guys know, there's a lot of this information is available out there for you, and also online. And then also there is on this same page, you can find something called the Ikekai curriculum. And the Ikekai curriculum is available for the public, and it is literally pages and pages, the PDF document of each particular species that is regulated in Hawaii and all of the information that goes along with it. In our larger Makai Watch trainings that we offer quarterly, which we will have more coming up, we go in depth into each species for you. So stay tuned for those if you're interested. But for now, just know that these regulations do exist, and you can find them online at the dlnr.hawaii.gov site. Okay, and so this is what that looks like when you go here to this website. It's going to look like this, and you're going to have these options over here. And so you can look at fishing areas, and you can also go down here to the species themselves. Yeah. Okay. When you go to the species themselves, it's going to look like this, and it's going to have the information for each fish species on there. And as you can see, it's highlighted here. You're going to find information also for marine invertebrates and limu. And that brings us to limu, which has an exception for the rules in the Pūpūkea Marine Life Conservation District. Within the boundaries of the Pūpūkea MLCD, it is permitted to take and possess up to 2 pounds combined total squeeze dry of limu kohu and limu lipe'epe'e by hand harvest only, provided the limu's holdfast is left in place. And so the holdfast is the thing that anchors the limu to the reef. And so it is illegal to take that. You actually have to pinch off the limu and leave that root, it looks like a root, that hold fast attached to the reef. It's kind of like your hair. If you cut your hair will keep growing, but if you yank it out by the root, then it won't usually grow back. And so that's the same idea with limu. And I'll use this moment to pause and mention to you folks, and this is something I know Jason's really excited about too. 2022 has actually been designated Year of the Limu. And so Jason and I are in a side hui called the Limu Hui. We're Limu nerds. We're self-proclaimed Limu nerds. And it's very exciting for us that we are helping to celebrate and educate about Limu all year long. And I know, right? Yay, Year of the Limu. And so Mālama Pūpūkea-Waimea in particular will be hosting a Limu Day. There's going to be different events every month throughout the islands. And so we will be hosting a Limu Day in April. And so for those of you that are Limu nerds like us, stay tuned. We'll put it in all the same ways that you found out about this today. We will let you know about our exciting Limu Day coming up in April. Okay, so let's just quickly go through some of the things that you might see. You know, a lot of folks that pass through the North Shore see things going on and aren't sure exactly what the rules and regulations are for boating. And so I just wanted to quickly go over those. It's very easy. They've designated zones for the Pūpūkea Marine Life Conservation District. So inside Waimea is Zone A. That's A. Inside A, you are not allowed to have any motorized vessels, period. Okay. No motorized vessels. You can only have sailing vessels with auxiliary engines that they're not allowed to use. They can only go by sail power only. Sailing vessels with auxiliary engines shall be required to enter and leave Zone A on sail power or by oar only. So no motoring in the bay. Okay. And that is point to point. So those same fishing points we looked at, if you were to draw a straight line from those fishing points, it's the same points there. You can embark and disembark from the shoreline on manually propelled vessels like kayaks and stand-up paddle boards and stuff like that. So in other words, you can go from the sand into the water and back out. So embark and disembark with things that float that aren't motorized. And then for vessels, they have to anchor 200 feet from shore and only in sand. So, you know, we see it a lot around 4th of July and in the summer, there's a lot of vessels breaking those rules. And we will let you know here in a second how you can report those. But just so you guys understand what those rules actually are, you must anchor at least 200 feet from shore and only in sand, and never motor in the bay. Got it? Okay. Okay. Zone B is going to be Kalua Amawa, or 3 tables. You might know it as 3 tables. You can embark and disembark on things that float that are manually powered and not motored. In other words, kayaks, paddle boards, just like you can at Waimea. So you can enter and exit via the sand here. And just like Zone A, no motorized vessels. Okay, pretty easy. Zone C is going to include Sharks Cove and Kapo'o tide pools. And so that one is actually a little bit different for the rules. So it's actually illegal to embark or disembark from the shoreline of Sharks Cove or Kapo'o tide pools. So just like Waimea and 3 tables, you can take out a kayak or a paddleboard. It's actually not allowed at Sharks Cove. Okay, and also no motorized vessels in this area ever. And then finally, the last zone that you see here is Zone D. So this is still in the sanctuary, but not inside the inner points of those 3 areas. And that one includes that area around the Wanana Po'oa Islets all the way to Kululua Point. That whole outside area of D, vessels can go through there motorized. But those motorized vessels need to move at a slow, no wake speed. Okay, so if you see a boat going through there and it's hopping through and leaving a big white line behind it, that is not a slow, no wake speed. You can go ahead and report that. But if you see a vessel going through there motorized on the outside at a slow, no wake speed, that is not a violation. All right. Let's see. Oh, and the last thing here, sorry, that slide got put out of order. That was showing you back in our rules and regulations what the invertebrates page of the website look like. Last couple of things I wanted to let folks know here at Waimea Bay, you know, there are fisher interactions. And as you can see in this photo, there are ways to deal with turtles, and the current recommendations for turtles, and Jason, I don't know if you have anything to add to this too, but the current recommendation for sea turtles is that if you hook a sea turtle, which happens at Waimea, like you can see in this photo, this is actually me. I didn't catch it, but I was there. It happens in Waimea a lot, and it just happens. And so the current recommendation is to actually reel that turtle in best you can and cut that line as close to the hook or at the hook. And then let that turtle go, because that hook will act kind of like, if it's in a flipper especially, or even in a cheek, it'll act kind of like an earring in the sense that it's going to rust out and go away eventually and cause a lot less damage to that animal than trying to remove that hook, which can rip flesh and things like that. So Jason, you want to elaborate on that at all?
No, you got it all. I think the big thing to remember is, you know, remove as much gear as you can and leave the hook to not cause any further damage. The line getting tangled up around the turtle or keeping them stuck at the bottom of the reef is really one of the bigger threats to them.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, so like I said, it's happened. We see it happen. And in this case, it was really interesting because there was this older gentleman on this side, and he was a longtime fisherman. And, you know, a lot of those fishermen are scared when that happens, like, oh no, we're going to get in trouble. And he actually told the boy, cut the line, cut the line. And we're like, no, reel it in. And so it was actually, if you can see, there was a lot of keiki around that day. And so it was really good to be able to sort of have that educational moment there. And luckily this turtle wasn't very big, so it wasn't totally impossible to reel in, but it was in the flipper and we were able to cut the line right at the hook and let the turtle go. The other thing you might come across is monk seals. The Pūpūkea Marine Life Conservation District is a habitat for the endangered Hawaiian monk seal. The rule there is a little different. You don't want to reel in the monk seal and you don't want to try to remove the hook. What you want to do is immediately call the monk seal response network number, which is here, and let them know that you've hooked the seal. It's not your fault that you hooked the seal. You're not going to get in trouble for it. What you're going to get in trouble for is for not letting them know that it happened, right? So call them, let them know, and they're going to instruct you based on the circumstance of that particular hooking, what to do in that situation. Okay. All right. So finally, what do you do if you see somebody breaking the rules? Okay, so what we would love for our community to do is call and report those violations. You can call 643-DLNR, or an even better way to do it is to utilize the DLNR tip app. And so the DLNR tip app is something you can download on your phone, and it's really awesome. You can put in the information, you can remain anonymous if you want to, you can put in the information, you can even snap a photo, give the area that you're at, and those tips they get filtered and they go directly to the supervisor of a particular district. And so it's kind of the fastest way to get information to doe care. So some of that really useful information that you're going to want to notate is the specific location of where the violation that you witnessed or are witnessing is happening, a description of the individuals involved. So middle-aged girl, big bun, brown hair, blue shirt. She's picking opihi at 3 tables. Okay, so that's the activity of what's happening. If it happens to be a vessel, say you're at Waimea and you see a vessel motoring inside the bay there, every vessel has an HA number on the side of it. And if you can see that number, you want to let doe care know what that number is. That really helps them, but also just a description of the vessel. If you happen to be, say it happens at Sharks Cove or at Kapo'o, sometimes you see somebody, you're watching them come to their car and they have fishing poles and a fish, they're going to be gone before doe care can get there. But if you can pencil down their license plate number, then the officers can actually follow up that way. And of course, any photos or video, like I said, in the tip app, you can actually take a photo straight from the tip app itself, or you can upload a photo that you've already taken. And so we're going to go over some of the etiquette and protocol surrounding this in a second. But just so you guys know, this is where you're going to give the information. So 643 DLNR, or download that tip app that you can have on your phone. So what don't you do if you see somebody breaking the rules? And as the Makai Watch volunteers in our community, this is really important information. We're never going to approach, attack, harass, or threaten anyone, okay? You don't, whether you're a Makai Watch volunteer officially or not, this is just how we should all be when we're dealing with fishers who have rights as well. We're not going to approach them, attack them, harass them, or threaten them. We are not enforcement. We're not going to take away anyone's gear. We're not going to be obvious with cameras or phones. You don't want to get in somebody's face and be like, I got you on camera, I'm turning you in, you're busted, right? Just be discreet and get that evidence. And also don't leave notes. We've seen that happen where people get mad and leave notes on cars and things like that. So we're not going to do any of that. Okay. All right. So what about educational interventions? You know, myself, Jason, and, you know, some of us who are really familiar with the rules and regulations are comfortable talking to people. Obviously, we could talk all day, right? We're comfortable with speaking to people in a calm and non-emotional way. We can not get, you know, it's important that you don't get too passionate if you're going to try to talk to someone about the rules and regulations. If you understand traditional Hawaiian fishing practices and gathering rights, because that's a really huge, important part of a lot of this. If you fully understand the rules and regulations pertaining to the Marine Life Conservation District or any area that you are and the other state shorelines, then you can choose to attempt an educational intervention. And those look like this, okay? First, only educate if you feel comfortable. Explain the rule. You're only educating them. You're not opinionated. You're not threatening them. You're not telling them how horrible you think they are, right? You can offer some information. You can offer a regulation book if you have it. And then you walk away, just letting you know this area is protected and it's a no-take zone. Here's the rule book. Have a nice day, right? And then what you can do is after you walk away is you can then report it or report before you try an educational intervention. But you just don't want to be rude or blatant, okay? Why? Because, or why do we want to do educational interventions? Well, sometimes doe care can't always get there. And so a good rule of thumb is to, if you're comfortable with all of these things, you know, or this is the way I do it, is I'll call doe care and I'll ask, you know, is there an officer available very soon? And sometimes they go, well, it's going to take them an hour to get there. And if that person looks like they're packing up and doesn't look like they're going to, you know, attack me and bludgeon me over the head with their fishing pole or whatever it might be a good idea to give them that education. Yeah. And so that helps eliminate unnecessary trips by doe care. Doe care is not going to get there by the time they leave. You know, maybe this is an educational opportunity. It also builds relationship with the community, which is really important because a lot of folks, you know, 90% of the time when I do an educational intervention, the response is, oh my gosh, I didn't know. Thank you so much for letting me know, right? And so we're not the enemy. Doe care is not the enemy, right? It's just they never know. So education, like we said, is such an important part of all of this, this work that we do to protect our shoreline. So Jason and I, we kind of have that whole education thing. And so just, you know, our community, you guys are all educators too, right? It's all of us are educators. And so sharing this information is the best thing that we can do. So finally, if you want to learn more about Makai Watch specifically, that same website that we talked about earlier, that hawaii.gov, you can go in there and you can learn all about the Makai Watch strategy, the standards and safety protocols, the evaluation, and also there's a Makai Watch volunteer application. And so just to remind you, our organization right now on Oahu is the only official Makai Watch organization for now. I'm sure there'll be more in the works. But if you're interested in becoming a Makai Watch volunteer, let us know. And like I said, we do offer in-depth trainings. They're put on in this same format and they last about an hour and a half and you just get more in-depth information about particular rules and regulations. And so we talked about this one already. What is Lawai Apono? Again, in addition to all of these rules and regulations, it's better to err on the side of understanding that ecosystem. We appreciate our relationship with DoCare. We have a very positive relationship with them. And so, yeah, come and join us. And finally, this is just the last slide that I have in my presentation. These are just some of the beautiful images of some of the things that you can see in and around the Pūpūkea Marine Life Conservation District, including this white tip reef shark that's actually in the Kapo'o tide pools. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to stop my share and just see if anybody has any questions. Any questions at all? Oh. Okay, I'm just seeing your comment, Christina. Hi, Christina. Christina Comfort. Thanks for outlining the education strategy. I've had a couple instances where I want to say something, but I wasn't sure the best approach. One time I did let some spearfishing teens know that the area was protected since we ran into them right in the water. Yeah, it happens. And so that is the best thing to do, is just let them know. Just be very like, hey guys, not sure if you know, but this area is protected and there's no take or fishing allowed here. And you can just leave it at that and report it if you think it's necessary. Yeah, awesome. Okay, if there are no questions, let's see, I'm just making sure. Okay, so Denise, I'm going to call you out just for a quick second here. So Denise is on here. She's in between teaching and stuff, but this is Denise Antolini. She's actually the president of our board for Mālama Pūpūkea-Waimea. And since Denise is on camera for a second, Denise, is there anything you would like to add before we call it a day today?
Oh, thanks, Jenny. Awesome job that you can pack in all that information so quickly with such enthusiasm. Just special shout out to everybody who is participating today. And I see so many friends on here who are big contributors. My fellow board member, Bob, and there's Christy in her car. So it always takes a village to, you know, protect these areas. And I saw Lisa Bishop's on there from Friends of Hanauma Bay, and just the more coalition building, the more we can work together, the better off we are. And I'm just really, I think we have to step back and say, what a great partnership between the Division of Aquatic Resources and our communities. And I know Lisa's nodding her head, and Bob and Christy and Jason and Jenny and everybody. And it's just a wonderful thing that we can say that, that we've gotten to this point working with DAR and DoCare. So I would just encourage folks who are on here, as you've already done, look for volunteer opportunities, check out all the information, and you know, we'll keep the ball rolling because we have a ways to go. The last thing I'll say is Jenny mentioned for MPW, we are partnering with DAR on the first management plan for the Pūpūkea Marine Life Conservation District as a model for management plans statewide for marine managed areas. And that's a big lift as part of the 30 by 30 program. And we're happy to be part of that and to support our other friends and communities across the state in our effort to protect Hawaii's nearshore waters and make them thriving and abundant. So yeah, thank you. Thanks awesome. For the chance to say mahalo.
Yeah, and you know, there is a survey that's out right now where you can give input on that management plan, that draft management plan. So if you go onto our Facebook or our Instagram, there's a link on both of those where you can actually fill out that survey. It's an online survey that you can contribute to some of the information that's happening right now. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody so much. Today was really fun. We actually got done a little earlier. So that's always great to have some extra time in our day. So we look forward to seeing you all on the next one. And we will actually post this recording later in our website. And so if you know of anybody who missed it or wants to see it, we will definitely have it available for everybody. Okay, awesome. Thanks, everybody.